Welcome, friends, to our next Fiction in Real Life podcast. I am Heather Moore, and I'm here with Julie Daines and Jennifer Moore, and we're missing Geigle Johnson today, but hopefully she'll be back next time. Anyway, we're really excited that we have a giveaway, and the way you enter the giveaway is if you just make a comment on our post. You can find us on our Facebook pages or on YouTube as well. We're giving away the newest timeless Georgian collection, which is A Midnight Masquerade, with authors Elizabeth Johns, Geigle Johnson, and Annette Lyon. That was almost a tongue twister for me. How about you guys? Anyway, so we are excited because this is an episode that we hope won't kill you, but we're going to be talking about things that can kill you and did kill people in the past because they had a lot of misinformation, which of course we do today as well. Anyway, so we will start out with Julie's story.
Okay, so my story begins with a trip that we had to England a couple years ago. And I think actually Jennifer Moore was with me on that trip. And we went to Hungerford Castle in Somerset. And in this castle, in the crypt, they have these lead coffins. And the lead coffins, so you can see there's 8 here, 6 adults and the 2 children there. Anyway, these lead coffins, they would like pickle the people and mummify them a little bit and put them in these coffins. And then the coffins, especially the face, was like an actual death mask of the person. And they put them in these tight coffins to keep the whole body together so that it wouldn't like decay and fall apart. But anyway, it turns out that during the Victorian era, because you know how Victorians are, they drilled holes in the coffins, and you could stick a little like stick down there and then taste the whatever was left in there, the spirit of the dead person. So as gruesome as that sounds, these people were actually, they died in the late 1600s. So really by the Victorian era, I'm not 100% sure what all would be in there for them to taste. But the thing is that for centuries, people have believed in this medicinal cannibalism, right? And, you know, especially during the 1600s and 1700s, it was a huge deal. This one doctor ground up skull and mixed it with chocolate. I know that King Charles II of England used to drink powdered skull and alcohol every day. It was like his king's drops. And to these people, since they didn't really understand how the body works, it made total sense for them because they believed that like cures like. So if you have head pain, you eat powdered skull. If you have a disease of the heart, you drink blood. It just made sense to them. They believed that even after a person died, still part of their like dormant spirit was in the dead body. And if they drank it, even Leonardo da Vinci believed that if you ate or drank something from a dead person, that essence of life was still in there. And once it came into your living body, it was revived, and it like revived the mind and body from the dead person's vitality. So it's hard to, I mean, as gross as all of that is, they didn't really understand anything better. So anyway, that's the gruesome story of the lead coffins at Hungerford Castle.
That's lovely. I'm just grateful. The more I hear these stories, the more I'm grateful that I was born a little bit later than all those events that happened.
Yeah. You know, but
so I really, well, I don't know. I mean, because since I do write a lot of historical, my first instinct would be if my historical covered an era where something like that happened, obviously I couldn't ignore it. But in general, I wouldn't book it. I wouldn't book it if I was just going to write a book so I could cover that, if that makes sense. What about you, Julie?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, you know how I like gruesome stuff, but I sort of agree with you that the actual booking of it might be too much for some readers.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's fascinating, and it really did happen through centuries and centuries. I mean, ancient Romans, everyone believed that consuming, dead body could help you. But I don't know. Maybe, I mean, we're all appalled. I'm reading Dracula again right now. We're all appalled at him drinking blood, and yet, you
Right.
know, it wasn't, 50 years before Dracula was written when it kind of barely started to die out.
Yeah. What about you, Jennifer?
I may, if I was writing about an apothecary or something, I might mention, I don't know, because I know like there's the mummies, mummy dust, people ground up mummies and had those like sprinkled on their soup or,
It was
or
like a
whatever.
Oh, it was a
delicacy.
I
huge
don't,
Yeah.
thing, and
if
people
it,
would be
so
at
if
the
it,
executions waiting for the blood to drop with their little
yes.
cups. And
Okay, I wouldn't do that. That crossed the line. So yeah, I don't, if it was part of the story and it could just naturally be there, but otherwise, ugh, no
Well,
thanks.
and I think that's okay because I know, I mean, I've written, we've all written stories with like battles in them and that kind of thing, where, there's one thing to kind of describe strategy and maybe an injury or maybe an advance or retreat, but you don't need to go into sometimes the exact details. So this would probably be similar to that, where maybe the apothecary is using a mummy, but you're not. Yeah, I don't know. I like, to me, a mummy is not really gruesome, but it's more desecrating, an
Yeah,
artifact. And I
still
think,
a
hey, we
body.
could use that for.
I do sort of feel like the whole thing is a little bit irreverent towards
Yeah,
the dead
that's what I feel,
body.
more
That,
kind
I
of a
mean,
sacrilegious
at the
type.
same time, I studied science and I learned all the anatomy from an actual cadaver. So, I mean, it's so hard to know
Right.
where you draw the line.
Yeah, very true. Okay, Jennifer, what's your story for us? Can you
Okay,
top it?
mine is also about Victorian crazy stuff that could kill you, but mine has to do with fashion. So the Victorians, and I'm sure people before and after, for whatever reason, this just everything I read was about Victorians. They had socks. The men had socks made with aniline dyes, which I have no idea what that is, but it's some kind of poison that it would inflame men's feet, and the workers that would make it, I don't know if they knitted it or however they made those socks, they would get open sores and it led to certain kinds of cancer. A lot of women wore lead makeup, which damaged their wrist, the nerves in their wrist, for whatever reason. I don't know. Lead poisoning damages your wrist nerves, and they couldn't lift their hands up because of it. And I don't know if it went away when you stopped using the makeup, or I don't know how that works. Celluloid combs that a lot of women stuck in their hair, they could explode if they got too hot. There's a story of a man that was using one, to comb his beard, and it exploded and blew, blew his face up. And in Brooklyn, there was a comb factory and the whole thing exploded. We've heard about Mad Hatters, and that is for mercury poisoning. They made hats out of beaver skin, and to make it so your hat's not all furry and fluffy, they used mercury to, make it more like a felt and kind of, flatten it down. And that would lead to, trembling was the first symptom. And then they would get paranoid delusions and cardiorespiratory problems. But the thing that I wanted to talk about is the one that I think is the most interesting. It's these arsenic dresses from the Victorian era. There was this bright green dye, and it was made from a copper, and it says like white arsenic. So I don't really know how. I don't know how the chemistry works or anything, but they would use this poisonous dye. It would be in gloves, dresses, hats. The like artificial flowery things people wore in their hair, and even on wallpaper. And the people that it was most dangerous for, of course, it's dangerous for the woman who's got it sitting on her skin all day. But it was the workers who are like sewing the dresses, or there's stories of these girls in these factories, and they're brushing that dust onto the flowers to make them turn green, and they're just smelling it, and it's getting all into their lungs and everything. It would get on their faces. And and a lot of them went blind, and people couldn't, figure out what was causing it. And then finally someone looks into it, and the London Times put out an article, and it was called The Dance of Death. And they did, research and figured out how much poison was actually in these dresses. And it was usually, so a headdress had enough arsenic to kill 20 people. And the green, like a giant green dress had way more. It could kill everybody in the ballroom if, people leaned on it, or if, you would just kind of have an open anywhere that it could get in your bloodstream, begin to. And then in 1860, they finally passed some legislation, no more green, no more poison green. And I think soon after that, they, someone made some kind of synthetic dye, so you could still have your green dresses. And I just wanted to show you this funny thing, as one of my books has an arsenic dress. Can you see that right there on the front? She's walking around with that thing, killing everybody she bumps into. Anyway, that's the story of the Victorian arsenic dresses.
So I personally love that.
I love it.
So I would book it. I mean, I think it would be cool to go back into the history. You said like the 1850s and 60s, and maybe have like a story set around that era, and then maybe how there's a scientist that does figure it out, but then the factory owner tries to get him killed, or, all this stuff, because he'll lose money. Anyway, but I think it's super fascinating, that whole thing. And just because it's just so wild too. What about you, Julie? What do you think?
Well, interesting fact. My grandmother's sister, when she was 2 years old, had a celluloid comb, and she stuck it in the fire and it killed her. She burned it, like burnt her hair and everything.
What is celluloid? I guess I don't know what it is.
I actually am not 100%.
But that it happened for real.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that definitely is a true thing. But anyway, yeah, I think that it's super fascinating, this whole arsenic thing. And there were so many things that people did for the sake of beauty and fashion that were lethal. And it's almost like they didn't care a little bit, that they cared a little bit more about being fashionable or pretty than putting lead on their face. I mean, I'm sure that there were many who were like, oh, okay, this is poison, I'm going to stop. But I think really some were just like, oh, I'm just going to keep going.
Keep going. Put a petticoat on under that thing. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
What about you, Jennifer?
Yep. I think it would be a cool element in a mystery, especially maybe someone uses gives someone a dress and hopes that it, leads to their demise, or even a pillowcase or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty green. I don't know. I think it's fascinating. So
yeah, I think it would be super fun. So I have a story as well. I'm sure we all know what blood transfusion are. And obviously in the early 1800s, there was a lot of experimenting going on, just how we've kind of already talked about. But most of the experiments were failing, but sometimes they would succeed. So even if you had like one succeed and like 20 people die right after, like they were considering the one successful experiment to be noteworthy. But these two guys, they actually are originally from England, but they immigrated to Canada. And let's see what their names are. I can't see that small. So Dr. James Bovell and Edwin Hodder. So there was a cholera epidemic in Toronto in 1854. And they were inspired by another doctor with the last name Daines, who had tried using lamb's blood in his patients. This is just another transfusion experiment from animal to people or people to people. And so they thought, well, there is oil and fatty particles in milk, and that will turn into the white I don't even know how to say that word,
corpuscles.
Yeah, of blood. So they thought that milk would regenerate white blood cells. And, that's total sense because, white milk and white blood, I don't know. Anyway, so this is what these doctors that were very well respected and world renowned. And so the first patient they tried it on, he survived and he improved in health. Of course, we know is a coincidence, right? Mm-hmm. But they took that to be like, wait, let's just keep doing it. And then, of course, the next 5 patients ended up dying. But because of some of the successes which were just coincidences. It became a popular method of treatment, especially throughout North America. It wasn't until the 1880s that saline infusions began to replace the milk. And then it wasn't until closer to 1900 that like the UK and some other places outlawed that use. So anyway, and that was after like the blood types were discovered and realizing that a blood type is what is going to help a person in real life. So I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of a strange story, but it is interesting. But I also feel like if I'm looking at it historically, it sounds like a lot of research and what's the point of the story? So I'd probably have to find like a story, but then have that maybe integrate into the story. So I'd probably maybe book it, but I'm not super excited about it because I feel like it'd be outside my wheelhouse a little bit. What about you, Julie?
So I think my problem is that I want to book all of these stories, but the question is how to do it without being gruesome. I mean, we are talking about
people dying,
killed from all of this stuff, and you don't want, all these people in your book dying. But at the same time, it's so fascinating. I don't know. So yeah, I want to book them, but I don't know. And incidentally, I looked up celluloid. It's a flammable plastic made from camphor and nitrocellulose, whatever that is.
Yeah. What about you, Jennifer?
I don't know. I don't understand it very well, especially all that sciencey stuff. And I think the biggest problem I'd have is like explaining it so that a contemporary audience would be like, does she know what she's talking about? What milk? They're putting milk in veins? Nobody ever did that, or so I'd have to explain it instead of just saying it in passing, like, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I have so many questions about it. Like, is it cow's milk? And do they just stick it in a tube and put an IV in? And I don't know. I don't understand it well enough to know what milk does inside your bloodstream to be able to handle that. So
yeah, and yeah, I see what you're saying. So, and I'd have to go back to the original article I read to figure out. I think it was from a lamb, the first one they tried, because the lamb's blood had one time helped a person, so they thought the lamb's milk would also help a person.
It's kind
anyway,
of religious,
I'm sure there's, Anyway, but we would love to hear from anybody who's listening or watching. Give us your comments. We're going to do a giveaway again for a Midnight Masquerade, and we will choose from those who are commenting. Also, if you would love to submit stories, whether they're family stories or stories from your town or where you grew up, or even historical stories that you've heard of, we are always looking for ideas. Sometimes it takes us a little bit to get to them because we like to kind of group them together in like-minded ways. But we'd love to hear from you. And thanks again for listening and joining. This has been Fiction
in
Real
Life.